Hi, this is Gary Jones. You probably know me from Stargate SG-1, Stargate Atlantis, Stargate Universe, and if there's any more Stargates, I'll be in them. And you're listening to Spoiler Country.
So I read somewhere that the character of Walter was inspired, or at least influenced, by the character Radar on MASH. Is that something that you've heard of? Is that true? What can you tell me about that?
I don't think, I think it was, to be honest, I think it was just a coincidence, because the character, my character, when I first started, was like basically entitled Technician. That was it. I didn't have a rank. I didn't have a name. It was just Technician. And back in the day, when you have like a generic title, you can be killed off. You know, it's like we can just kill you off and replace you with another technician, right? So the more that people were watching the show, they started to see me quite a bit. Fans started referring to me as Chevron guy. Right? I was, oh, look, it's the Chevron guy. And I have no control over that. Like, I was just kind of being happy to be working. Oh, I'm on another episode. Oh, that's awesome. That's so great. And then at some point, they changed it to, in the script, to Sergeant Davis, right? I was like, oh, okay, so now I've gone from Technician to Sergeant Davis. The minute they give you a name, that's a different deal. It's like now they would have to kind of give a reason why you're no longer, if they're going to take you off the show, they've got to go, well, he was either killed or transferred, or make some kind of reference to you that your character is no longer there. So that was good. That was a good sign. And I was a sergeant. And then I became, I can't remember when exactly, but over the course of some seasons, because it was on for 10 seasons, I became a master sergeant. So then I was master sergeant, and then they gave me a name like Norman. They gave me the name Master Sergeant Norman Davis. And I thought, oh, this is getting better and better, that they're being way more specific with who I am. So next thing I know, I come in, and now I'm a Chief Master Sergeant.
Nice.
They keep promoting me, and I keep asking them, why are you promoting me? Why am I getting promoted? And they're like, oh, you just do. We just, that's just our decision. So it's like, okay, fine. And so I was Chief Master Sergeant Norman Davis. Then in one episode called 2010, where the team goes sort of like into the future a little bit, and the Stargate's a tourist attraction, and I was like a tour guide, my character. I meet them in the future, and we sort of look at each other, and Richard and I look at Richard Dean Anderson, and I go, Colonel, like, what are you doing here in the, oh, what are you doing here? I go, Colonel, and he looks at me, and he goes, Walter? And I just keep going, right? Because my name's not Walter.
Yeah.
So I think, okay, wasn't in the script, keep going. They film that scene. They come up to Richard Dean after the scene's over, and they go, oh, Rick, I think we have to shoot that again, because he's like, why? What was wrong with it? And I said, well, his name's not Walter. And he said, well, it is now. So that was the kind of the power of Richard Dean Anderson. And they're like, oh, so now Norman Davis is also Walter. How are we gonna do this? So then I became, and I'm not kidding you, Chief Master Sergeant Norman Walter Davis, right? And I don't know what season that was in, right? But it was in the later seasons. Then, and this is one of my favorite things, is that Don Davis, bless his heart, when he was still alive, lovely Don Davis, what a great guy that he was. Don had to deliver a line to me where I'm sitting at my console, and because we're in the Air Force, right? I mean, that's what the branch of the military was running. Stargate was the American Air Force. And so sometimes Air Force personnel, guys, can get referred to as airmen, right?
Yeah.
Airmen. Makes sense. But the way Don pronounced it, because he was from Missouri, he was like, "Oh, open the Irish, Harriman." And so we did the scene a few times, and just did the scene. I didn't think twice about it, because I knew in the script it said "open the Irish, Airman," and Don was just saying his lines, but he was doing it in his particular accent. It was like, open the Irish, Harriman. And so after they shot it, they were like, I heard them saying, "God, can't shoot it again because now it's in the can." But sounded like Don said, what was he saying? Was he saying Airman? Sounded like Harriman. My name then got changed to Harriman because of Don Davis's mangled Missourian accent. And then they just went, okay, well, he can't be Chief Master Sergeant Norman Walter Davis Harriman, because that's insane. So they cut out the Norman Davis. They just changed it. So I started out as technician, went to sergeant, went to Master Sergeant, Chief Master Sergeant Davis, Chief Master Sergeant Walter Davis, Chief Master Sergeant Norman Walter Davis, Chief Master Sergeant Walter Harriman. and that was the arc of my name over 10 years. So I started out as technician, ended up as, started out as basically, when I got a name, it was Norman Davis, and ended up as Walter Harriman. And I have 8x10 promo shots that I've signed at conventions.
Yeah.
And some of the early ones have a name tag that says Davis, and the later ones say Harriman. And it's the same character.
I was surprised they never even bothered to explain it. I don't know.
Nobody in the show, none of the characters ever said anything. but they did, because in the early days, nobody ever referred to me as Norman, but they did call me Walter. Yeah. Right? They did say Walter. But here's the thing, to just sort of the long-winded way to get back to your question, is that Walter OReilly, Radar OReilly, from MASH, was, he was called, his real name was Walter. But it just turned out that when Rick's character became the general and stayed on the base and didn't go out and do any adventures, because the real Richard Dean Anderson had massive back problems and was he just couldn't jump around and do all the action sequences. So they just made Rick the general, and then they brought in other people, like Ben Browder and all those guys, and Corin Nemec. And so when Rick was not relegated, but stationed then at the base at the SGC, he said to them, "I want to have a fun relationship with Walter. I want Jack O'Neill to have an interesting, fun, slightly comedic relationship with Walter." And so that's how that came about. But it looks very coincidental, because I was kind of I was like the non-commissioned officer that knew how to run the place, and he needed my help. I always had a clipboard. I knew exactly what was happening. I became more probably administrative than I used to be. I was like his sort of right hand man in the SGC. And then they just wrote it so that he and I kind of had some fun scenes, and it was great. It was great. I mean, I got to tell you, I'm so grateful for that show and how appreciative I am of the writers and the producers that actually took note of any kind of acting and comedic skills that I had. And they said, "We think, Gary," and they started feeding me more and more lines and giving me more stuff to do. And I'm indebted to those guys, because they made my time on Stargate way more fun and interesting, rather than just a guy who delivers exposition and says, oh, you know, we're back from this planet and we're going to this planet and let me open the gate and let me close the gate, that kind of thing, which was like it was more like that in the early days. But in the later days, it was way more kind of fun stuff happening. And I really, really have fond memories of my time on the show because that place was a huge, big family. What was great about, a lot of people don't know this, but they used to just bring people up from the lower levels. Like when I got there, guys like Martin Wood and Andy Makita and Peter DeLuise, those guys were all assistant directors. They were not producers. They ended up being producers on the show and consultants, and they script writers. They just worked their way up within the hierarchy of the show, and basically Brad Wright and Rob Cooper promoted from within. You know, much like I got my fake promotions, those guys got actual promotions.
Right.
And then it became like super fun because somebody like Andy Makita, who's a pretty good buddy of mine, he was just like, Andy's the greatest guy. And he directed Heroes Part 1 and 2 that I was in with Saul Rubinek, where Saul Rubinek comes in as a documentarian, you know, like who's documenting the inner workings of the SGC for government archival purposes. And there's a famous, famous as in amongst the Stargate fans, where Saul's camera crew is interviewing me in the SGC, and he's saying, he sets up the camera. He's like, okay, tell us about what you do for a job. And I go, well, I open the iris and I close the iris. And he's like, okay, and what else? And I go, well, it's pretty much my job. And I say Chevron 1 encoded, and I say, then I get to the end and I say Chevron 7 lock, just to kind of shake it up a bit. I'm kind of full of myself, and I'm thinking, yeah, you know, I'm being interviewed, and that was the writing. That was the writers. When I read that, I laughed my ass off because I thought, I can't wait to do this scene because it's so funny. But what you have to understand, and what allowed me, not allowed me, but like enabled me really to stay on the show and be part of like any kind of comedic strain, was to be able to figure out what the comedy was. I had to figure out, okay, above and beyond, no matter what, no matter how funny my lines are, the funniest guy on the show is going to be Richard Dean Anderson, and you do not trump RDA. You just don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I had to figure out, okay, what is the humor here? What is the tone of it? And where do I fit in? And because my background was in comedy, I was able to do that. I had the ability to go, oh, okay, I see where I fit in. And then I could just deliver my lines and have fun with my lines without taking anything away from RDA or, you know, the fact that he was like the main star. And you just got to know that. It's like that on set. You cannot go in and trump the star. So I just played the comedy as kind of real and as kind of, you know, low key as I could. And deadpan, and the fans just ate it up. The fans went nuts for it, and they, to this day, I still get people, you know, remember me on the show, and so I'm indebted to that show. It's you know.
I also find that the character of Walter, or Norman, however you want to call him, was kind of like identifiable as the audience surrogate, because he was often reacting to what was happening. Did you find that as the character as well, that you were kind of viewed as almost like the audience in that moment, trying to react to kind of like the action that was happening in front of him?
I have to say that in the moment, I wouldn't have known that. I would have no sense of that because I was just trying to act. So not thinking, oh, I know what I am. I'm the audience's surrogate. Okay. I know what I am. I'm like their eye on this. No, I'm just in it. What you're telling me, what you're saying is what I got told years later by fans at conventions who would come up to me and say, you were the everyman who we related to.
Ooh.
And I was and my character was a non-commissioned officer. And if you know anything about the military, and any military people will tell you this, not officers, but any non-commissioned people and not non-commissioned, members of the military, they will tell you that the non-coms, as they call them, run the show, and that the officers don't know anything. They're like, the officers dumb as a bag of hammers, but they run the show. And if it wasn't for the non-coms like Walter, the army and the military would just grind to a halt. And they think, oh, the officers just think they're so great, so smart, blah, 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 blah. We're the ones who run the show. So, and when I first started hearing that, I was like, oh, really? You're kidding. And they're like, trust me. So they would tell me that all the time. I would meet with guys, no, not just guys, but just, all male and female military personnel. And they would all tell me the same thing. They all told me the same thing. They said you were the guy, your character was the guy that ran the show. And it was like when Beau Bridges came on, like he was like, how do I do this? Like, it's like, sir, you got to press the intercom button on your phone. Like he had no clue, right? Yeah. And even Rick's like, what's going on? And I would tell him, right? So that's why they brought me in, so that they could show that these people were new to the SGC and that I had been around forever, and I knew the inner workings and how it all ran. So they just wrote it that way. But I just, sorry to interrupt, Jeff, for one second. But I also, just to sort of underscore that, they had somebody at the Air Force down in the States who they would send scripts to. And that person vetted all the scripts. So if there was anything in any of the scripts that from a military standpoint didn't make sense, or like, you go, no, he wouldn't do that. He's, that guy's a sergeant, that guy's a lieutenant. No, they wouldn't talk like that. So they would tell the producers and the writers this, and they'd sort of go through it and they'd redline it. So that I have in my possession, I have an email from somebody in the military, in the Air Force, from when Ben Browder was on the show. So that would have been somewhere between season 8 and 10. And I think more than likely season 8, because he was just new to the gig. But he came into a scene once and called me Sarge. Call me Sarge. They filmed it, and then they sent it down for the airport, to the Air Force to vet, and the email came back and said, no, he cannot call Walter Sarge. There's no way. That's not part of the hierarchy. He can only call him either Chief or Walter. So they had to change that.
Oh, wow. They
had to edit around that so that Ben did not call me Sarge. And I had no clue. To me, it was like, oh yeah, I'm not going to say, yeah, Ben, I don't think you called me Sarge in the scene. I had no idea. But sure enough, emails there, and they said you've got to change that, to the point where I remember this one couple came up to me at a convention, the husband and wife, and the husband was ex-military, I guess maybe ex-Air Force or whatever. And his wife said that he was a nightmare to watch procedural shows with, like cops or especially military shows. He'd just be watching and go, bullshit, that didn't happen. There's no way. Oh, yeah, right. And she said he had a running commentary whenever you sit down to watch a military-centric show with him. And she said it just drove her crazy. And she goes, Stargate was the only show where he said nothing. She goes, he just watched the show. He's like, that's right. They do that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that blew my mind, because I thought, wow, that's to the point where Stargate has really, really invested in sort of doing their homework to make it right. And like I said, just that example of Ben Browder just being able, him thinking, oh, I'll casually call him Sarge, and they're like, no, it's not happening.
and I think what else I think people just noticed about how you perform your character is that he just seemed such an honorable character. He seemed like a very like loyal, dedicated character. Was that something you brought to the character, or was there something they told you about him that, you know, play him this way, play him, this is like a backstory for him? Anything at all?
No, they didn't give me. They gave me nothing. They gave me nothing. Whatever you see on screen, and thank you for noticing or saying that, they didn't give me anything. I remember like well into the show, probably like in one of the later seasons. I remember just as a joke, Peter DeLuise was directing, and we would always joke around all the time. And he said, "Okay, we're going to shoot this scene. Gary, you're going to say your line." And and I go, "Yeah, Peter, you know what? I'm not sure if Walter would say." And he just goes, "Shut up and just sit down and say the line." And we just all had a big laugh about it, you know, because it was like I was playing it up like
Yeah.
when would I ever say, "Yeah, I don't think Walter would say that." He's like,
right.
"Yeah, he would say the line. Shut up, sit down, say the line." So they didn't give me anything. All I did was, I think the only decision I made that I think impacted how I played Walter was that I decided that I would treat the Stargate like a mechanic replacing an air filter in a Ford Taurus.
Okay.
You get what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, can you imagine if by season 8, I'm still sitting there awestruck by the Stargate?
Gotcha.
Oh my God, the Stargate. Oh my God. I couldn't do that. I had to treat it like, this is where I work. That thing's broken again. We need to fix that. What's the ETA on fixing that? You know, it's like, when am I going to get my Ford Taurus back? Well, we said Wednesday, but it's looking like Thursday. Oh man, I need my car. Yeah, I know, but like, whatever. You know, we can't get the part yet. You know, how do you get parts for a Stargate?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's
Right.
it's like, well, you can either wait and get the real thing, or we can just like source out some aftermarket Stargate stuff, and it might break down again. So it's up to you. When do you want it? You know, so that was my attitude of play it as mundane and everyday. Not mundane. I mean, my character cared about it, but play it more everyday. Like, I just show up for work, and I go down, you know, X number of stories in Cheyenne Mountain, and I walk into the SGC, and there's the Stargate, and that's where I work. So I think by doing that I was kind of unimpressed after a while. You know, when the thing broke down, it was like, oh, for God's sake, this piece of crap. Like, seriously? You know, and then Siler would come in with his giant wrench, you know, and then we had our thing back and forth. But I think that helped. I think that helped in the portraying of that character, because it was like, well, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I read, I don't know if this is true, but I read that you're one of only 2 actors to show up in every season of SG-1, every season of Atlantis, and the first season of Stargate Universe. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
So
that's accurate.
So was there a noticeable difference in production in being in either the Atlantis show, SG-1 show, or Star Trek Universe? Where did it feel distinctly different for you?
How do you mean different? Just
did the atmosphere different? How it was? I mean, the feeling among the actors, was it different? How it was handled differently?
I was way more used to SG-1, obviously, just because I knew the actors, and you know, it's everybody just kind of knew each other. They knew they knew each other's sort of rhythms and what to expect. So when I did any kind of crossover with the Atlantis, I didn't know those guys. I knew Paul McGillion, and he's a really good buddy of mine. Paul's awesome. Funny guy, great actor. Just love that guy. But I remember doing a scene, and you know, a couple of months ago, I had to put together a demo reel for like an acting reel. And I was thinking, oh, what am I going to put on it? I realized that I did a scene with Jason Momoa in Stargate Atlantis, and it's just me and him. and this guy that I know who puts together my demo reels, he dug it up, and it's hilarious. It's not very long, but it's pretty funny, and it's just me talking at him, and he's just bored out of his mind. But I'm in a scene. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll put that on my reel. Me acting with Aquaman. So the only difference. Oh, and the other thing is that if you think it was Stargate SG-1 was shot on Soundstage 5, and that Atlantis was shot on Soundstage 6. They were like next door to each other on the MGM lot, and so you would just go from one to the other. But all the directors and the the ADs, they were all the same. So you would have Peter DeLuise shooting an episode of Stargate SG-1, and you'd have Martin Wood shooting an episode of Atlantis. So if I went on set, if I went on to Atlantis, it's not like I was walking into like, oh my God, who are these people? It was like everybody. There was like a door between the two studios, and everybody went for it.
That's also. I mean, what did the family extend to these other shows? Was there a lot of intermingling among the cast members of the different shows because you're that close to each other?
We weren't that close to each other. I mean, that's kind of like a fallacy. I mean, I became pretty good friends with Amanda Tapping, and still am. She's great. She was one of the first people who really kind of welcomed me into the show on SG-1, and we both discovered that we were from Toronto, and we'd both been in comedy troupes, and we both knew a couple of the same people. That was really cool. And Amanda's fantastic. I have nothing but love and respect for that woman. She's like awesome. But she was also really warm to me when I came in and just would talk to me, because it's very much like, in the early days, I was just like, yeah, hey guys, I'm part of this too, and like nobody paid any attention to me. That's why I kind of thought when they first asked me, when some people first asked me to come to a convention in Vancouver, I was like, why do you want me there? And they were like, well, because you're like, the fans want to meet you. And I was like, I don't think so. I think you got that wrong. They're like, no, you're the Chevron guy. And I'm like, the Chevron guy? What are you talking about? The Chevron guy? They're like, yeah, nobody knows your name. So the fans just call you the Chevron guy. And I was like, you're kidding. I had no idea. I thought the camera just would kind of pass me like that. I'd come like this. I'd say my life, Chevron 1 encoded, and then just go. And nobody paid any attention to me. And it was like not the case. I thought, oh my God, wow, this is mind blowing. So and when I walked into this convention, into the lobby of the hotel, they went, oh my God, it's the Chevron guy. I was like, what? Shocked.
Well, that's the first time you realized just how big of a fan base that Stargate had?
Yeah. Yep. I started to kind of like, just like, people are actually gathering in hotels to like, I didn't even know. I'd sort of heard a little bit about conventions from the other cast members, but of course they were in great demand to show up at these conventions, because the people want to meet the leads of the show. And I'm like, fair enough. But for a character like me that was like a secondary character, I thought there's no way that I'm on anybody's like convention wish list. But apparently I was. So,
I don't always think that Stargate gets the credit that some other fan base shows like Star Trek get, but the fan base for Stargate, I think, is every bit as dedicated, every bit as strong as a lot of these other major franchises, like Stargate, the Star Wars fan base, some of these others as well. Would you agree with me?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. Not only that, like I've done conventions so much now that people bring their kids, and they've introduced their kids to Stargate. So they've watched all 10 seasons, and then they make their kids watch it. Then they rewatch it with their kids, and now their kids are into it. And it's like it's generational, which is mind blowing to me. I have traveled around the world. I've gone to many different countries and surprisingly seen many of the same fans.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I could see somebody in Chicago and see them in Germany.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah, no, it's like I'm like, don't I know you? Haven't I met you before? You look familiar to me. And they were like, yeah, I saw you in you know what, in France. It's like, what are you doing here? They're like, oh, I just want to come to this convention. So people will. That's another thing that became really evident to me, that it's a community. You know, the Stargate fan base is a community. And at first, I had a really hard time with it. I was like, I can't get my head around this. And it was only when I realized that I started really, like, the more conventions I did, the more I noticed that it's a very non-judgmental, supportive environment for all these people. And they're just lovely. They're just really, really, really nice people. And they just happen to be obsessed with Stargate, and they have a great love for it. You know, they just love Stargate. They just love meeting the actors. And when I started doing the conventions, they said, well, can you get up on stage and take questions and, you know, talk about the show? And because I have the comedy background, and because that, you know, I came from an improvisational background, I was like, oh yeah. And then I just started telling stories. I started telling these Stargate stories, and the fans went crazy for it, because I'm not just one of those guys who shows up as, okay, I'm a lead in the show. You know, here I am. Okay, do you have any questions? No, I try to, I consider myself to be like a value added guest. You know, like a value added guest who not just shows up, but, you know, to sign autographs, but also as an entertainer. And how can I entertain the fans? That's that's my main thing. And so yeah.
So, I mean, I've heard rumors that there's been discussions of a revival to Stargate. Is something that you've heard as well?
I hear all these rumors. I saw something on Twitter, maybe like maybe last month, and it said something like Amanda Tapping has been signed or agreed to be in the next Stargate iteration of the revival of SG-1. And I wrote her immediately. I said, hey, you've signed on. Don't you need Walter? And like, do I have to pull out the flight suit? And she just laughed and she said, no, it was just a crock. It was just made up stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. I said, but you know, I said, if it does happen, Walter will be happy to come out with retirement and sell his bowling alley and come back to the SGC. And she said, okay, great. That would be awesome.
You know, the thing with, I always wonder about Stargate, because Stargate is great because the stories are great, but the actors in it are great. Do you think what you have on SG-1 is repeatable? Like, if they try to redo it, do you think they could ever match what was already there? Or do you think?
No, I don't.
Yeah, because I can't imagine there'd be another Richard Dean Anderson. There's not another Christopher Judge. There's not another There's not another Tapping, and all these other characters. I feel like
it would just
have the show.
It would have to be, you know, let's say, okay, just for sake of argument here, like, let's say Amanda came back, they did Stargate Revival, and let's say Amanda came back as a general, right?
Yeah.
And ran the SGC. And let's say I had retired, but she brought me back, said, I want Walter back here because he knows how to run this kind of thing, right? And then they might get like 3 other leads who have a completely different chemistry. But you would have to allow that chemistry to be what it is, because nobody knew the kind of chemistry that was going to occur between those 4 leads. Nobody had a clue. I mean, it's great that they auditioned them and they're good actors and this will look good. Like, you know, Michael Shanks is perfect for Daniel Jackson, and then Amanda's wonderful, and blah, blah, blah. But even by hiring them before the show even started shooting, you still have no idea what their chemistry is going to be, or who's going to be like the odd wheel, or if something's not going to gel. You just don't know, you know? And if that were the case, then you might have to like get rid of that person and replace them, and hopefully that chemistry works. So I would just say that, you know, that chemistry was what it was. It was of the day. It was of a certain kind of, it had a certain well, it had a certain kind of relevancy for the time that it took place. And I don't know how you repeat that. It would literally be, can you imagine saying, let's revive Seinfeld, but we're going to do it with George, Elaine, Jerry, but not Kramer, like a different guy.
Right.
You know, it's the same thing. You just, that they were the show, and Richard Dean, Michael, Chris, and Amanda, you know, they were SG1. How do you top that? It was a chemistry, and you can't recreate, you can't manufacture that chemistry. It was completely organic.
And yeah, and that's always what I wonder when they're talking about redoing it. It's like, I mean, it'd be nice as a fan to have Stargate back on the airwaves, but it would never be the same Stargate. It would be almost like watching the Star Trek movie that they redid with like the new Captain Kirk, the new Spock. I mean, it was a good movie, but it wasn't Shatner, it wasn't Nimoy. It didn't feel, it never will feel the same, like ever.
No, and I mean, you could. It's the same thing that when you go, people say, "Who's your favorite James Bond?" It's like, well, whichever James Bond you grew up with, you know,
right?
It's like that's your favorite Bond. So, you know, when they change Bonds, it's like, oh no way, come on, you know, oh, you're going from like Sean Connery to Roger Moore, no way, you know. But of course, he was in for like 7 films.
Yeah,
did like an insane amount of films, and he was James Bond for like the longest time, and then that generation of people who grew up on Roger Moore would say, well, no, Roger Moore is James Bond, you know. Sean Connery is kind of old school, you know.
Oh, I agree with you absolutely 100%. So moving just a little bit, I also read that, so you teach not only improv, but also how to create pitches. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do that. I do that at the Vancouver Film School.
Yeah, because someone I do comic book writing, I always try to, and the thing that's the hardest for me to always do is writing a pitch. So what advice would you give to novice writers on how to create a pitch that really sells?
Oh, you just have to, you got to be yourself. You don't try to be anybody other than who you are. And you've got to be excited about your pitch. And you've got to, I would say more than anything, you've got to figure out what your theme is, and also why this project is so personal to you. What's the personal angle for you particularly? Because that will actually end up being more interesting to people talking to you than just talking about the plot of your book or movie.
Well, what do you think is the most common mistake that pitch writers make that they may not realize they're making?
Yeah, this is probably the most common thing is when say you've written a film, right? You've written a script, and people will always say to you, "What's it about?" What's it about? The answer to that should be the theme. So in other words, what's it about? It's about revenge, right? That's the theme. Oh yeah, it's about revenge. Oh, okay. So what happens in it? But when people get asked what's it about, they answer what happens. They tell the plot. What's it about? Oh, it's about this guy who meets another guy, and they go on this, you know, it turns out that they're both assassins working for blah, blah, blah. And then they meet this girl, and then they travel here, and I forgot. Oh yeah, I forgot. The other guy is the one guy's brother, but he doesn't know it. And then, and he's married too, and you're already lost. Like, I've heard so many pitches, and I'm like, okay, I'm lost. I don't know what's happening, you know, because they're always talking about plot. Because the people who pitch think that their plot is more interesting than the idea of the theme that they want to explore.
Oh,
so
wow,
okay. I would say, I tell this to my students all the time now, and I've learned this over teaching like 4 years now. I go, if you tell me what the plot is or why it's very important to you, like where it lives in you, I just find that really interesting. And then you can tell me about what the plot is. Because if you tell me that you want to explore a certain theme, you can explore that theme in any genre. It could be a romantic comedy, it could be a Western, sci-fi, it doesn't matter. But imagine if it's like if you go, oh, the theme of my film is revenge, and I'm doing it through a romantic comedy, be like, oh, tell me, okay, so how does that work? You know,
Yeah.
as opposed to just launching right into the plot, because nobody cares and people get bored and they get lost. So if I was going to give any advice to anybody, is when you pitch, start with a theme, start with why it's important to you, start with why you're passionate about it, and go from there.
Is there a certain, maybe either like length that you should be hitting on it? Are you talking about like saying in a sentence, 2 sentences? I mean, how much should you have it whittled down?
Well, you have to learn to write a log line.
Okay.
You can just go online and learn how to write a log line. A log line is like when a young boy meets his, ex high school buddy, and they go on a crime spree. They find out that blah, 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 blah. They learn the lesson of da, 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 da. Like, that's it. That's enough. A log line for The Godfather would be, and I think I read this. It's like a mafia crime don, like a mafia don, an aging mafia don struggles to hand his criminal empire over to one of his 3 sons. That's it. You go, oh, and then you watch the film and it's like way more complicated than that.
Yeah.
But that's the gist of it. The log line is the gist of what happens in the film.
What would you say for a pitch for Stargate if you were thinking about your show? Like, how would you have put that into a sentence log line?
Oh God, I don't know. I'd have to give that some thought. But it would basically be about 4 military, 3 military personnel and an alien travel through a time-space continuum portal to visit other cultures. Something, like it could be like that.
When you're doing something like that, do you think about the character first, or or is it more important to talk about the character in a pitch or a log line, or the action of like what?
I think you want to mostly say the action of what people are going to see. You're going to see in The Godfather. You're going to see this mafia don struggle to hand his criminal empire over to one of his sons. You're going to see that. But you don't need to say Don Vito Corleone, aging criminal mafia patriarch, has 3 sons. One is a hothead, one is weak, and the other one is perfect but doesn't want it. It's like, okay, yeah, that explains it more. But you just don't need to go down that road.
Why do you think so many people struggle with pitches? I mean, it seems like even like no matter how good of a writer you think you are, it feels like the pitch is always a weakness for a lot of people. Like, why do you think that is such a difficult thing for writers to do?
Because a lot of times they're not confident in their. If anything, the trap that writers pitching ideas get into is overselling something. That's why the elevator pitch is so perfect for. In my class, I teach the elevator pitch, which is about 2 minutes long. It's like you have to learn to pitch in 2 minutes. If you can pitch in 2 minutes, you can pitch in 5 or 10 minutes. But if you can't, if you can only pitch in 10 minutes, sometimes you don't have the time. Like sometimes within that 2 minutes is the log line. Is like to be able to say the log line so that the person you pitch into goes, oh, let's talk about this further. It's like a conversation starter, to be able to pitch. But I think if anything, people oversell their ideas. They get caught up immediately in telling plot, and it's not important. It's not. You can talk about the plot later, but if you can intrigue people with the theme or kind of like a human, like how can people relate to it? Because think of it this way: if you start out by saying, my film is about revenge, people automatically go, oh yeah, I know what that is. I've kind of experienced that in my life. I've been vengeful. I've tried to get revenge on somebody, on a kind of a human, just everyday level. That's something that people are more likely to relate to. And then they say, so what did you, okay, so your film's about revenge. What happens in it? And you go, well, it's about two alien assassins, right?
Yeah.
People go, oh, okay. Now, if you started out by saying, they say, what's your film about? And you go, it's about two alien assassins or da 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 da. Nobody can relate to an alien assassin. Like, how can you? You can't relate to that. So you've got to pitch out of the gate with what is the most relatable thing that people can go, okay, I'm on board so far. But if you come at them with like your really cool, clever idea, trying to bowl them over and go, guess what? It's about two alien assassins. I guarantee you, I don't care if it's about alien assassins. If you start talking about the plot, you're going to bore them. They'll be like, they'll still feel like, yeah, okay, but what's it about though? Like why are you writing this? Like what is making you write this? And I've met countless writers when they told me about their project, and I go, what's the theme? What's the theme of it? And they go, oh, the theme? Oh, the theme. Well, I guess the theme would be, and I'm thinking, holy shit, you haven't thought your theme out? You don't know what the theme is? Like, you don't know what you're writing to? And that always blows my mind. And I go, well, you have to have a theme. And they're like, I guess. Well, maybe it's like revenge plus requited love plus this plus that plus this. And I guess it's a bit of that. I'm like, no, you can't have 6 themes in a film. You can't.
Right.
You know, it's like, no, what you're trying to do right now is you're trying to come up with themes on the spot that cover every base. It's like, well, if I don't get the revenge thing, I'll at least get the unrequited love thing, you know? It's, and meanwhile, you're sort of going back and forth between them, and you're canceling out all of them. So you gotta kind of do it like that. That's what I say is to do the theme first.
I really appreciate that's I think fantastic advice, because like I said, that's something I always have issues with. I always when it's time to submit that pitch, it's always the one that gets me the cold sweats. It's like, oh shit. Yeah,
I'm telling you, you will lose the cold sweats when you start figuring out before anything what is the theme, what's the tone, what is like. Don't talk about what happens. That's last. That's the last thing. It would be the equivalent of write the outline before you write the script. You know how many people sit down to just write a script and they don't write an outline? And by page 30, they've like run out of, they go, why is this? I've run out of like the story. I don't know what I'm writing. That's because they don't have an outline.
Well,
you have to have an outline.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Mr. Jones, for talking with me. I think that was incredible advice, and hopefully,
can you call me Gary instead of Mr. Jones?
Oh, Gary, most certainly. So I've always used to go with Mr. It was a great pleasure talking with you, and I think that's great advice. And I think
awesome talking to you, Jeff. Thank you for having me on the show. It was wonderful. It was like this is a really fun conversation that kind of had some breathing room. You know, like we got to talk about lots of kind of cool things. It's great.
Thank you so much. And like I said, it was totally worth being canceled on a few times to get to
it. Yeah. So if I cancel in the future with anybody else and they get upset, I'll be like, well, you're no Jeff Haas.
Yeah, it'll be totally worth it. Trust me. The more cancellations, the better the show that will eventually happen. But once again, thank you so much. I hope you have a great night.
Yeah.
And if they ever bring back Stargate, you better be on it.
That's a great ender, Jeff. Thanks a lot, man. Take care.
No problem.
Stargate! And we're back.
That's right. We are back. Back in the saddle again. Well, I hope you guys really, really enjoyed that as much as we did making it for you. And if you liked what you heard and you want to hear more, you got to go check out Spoilerverse.com, because at Spoilerverse.com, we have a plethora amazing directors and artists of all walks of life, and editors and writers. And oh my God, are you a lover of comic books like we are? Then there's so many amazing people from the comic book world over at Spoilerverse.com. And I highly implore you to go there and check it out.
Yeah, and while you're there, you can check out all the other podcasts on our network, like Bridges and Geekdoms and Funny Book Forensics and Haphazard Adventures and Nerds from the Crypt and so many more.
Misery
We put out
Point Radio.
episodes all the time. Go check all of them out. And check out all of the reviews and previews and articles we have going up every single day for you. Every day on Spoilerverse.com for you to check out and to read and to love and to like and to comment. We have a store link. You want to help support the site? You can do it two ways. One, go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/spoilercountry. Or go to our store link in the middle of the site there and get a t-shirt, a face mask, a hoodie, something, look fly as hell, and help support the site when you do that, because we get $1 or $2. And, maybe you want to talk to us. If you do, you can do it obviously on all the socials, but if you go to scpod.us/Discord, you can join our public Discord server and come chat with us all day long.
I couldn't say it better myself, dude.
There you go.
You just mouthed out a ton of information at once. And really, I hope you guys enjoy what you're hearing, because we're working our butts off to bring it to you.
We are.
I guess there's only one left thing. One left thing? Yeah, I'm going to go with it. There's only one left thing left to do.
What's that?
In an oceans of podcasts,
We are Cthulhu.
as Cthulhu compels you to
Spaghetti. Open the mind.
and read more.
Spaghetti.